our country come out of the private sector, so I'm glad to be part of it.
Great. So I mentioned that we're going to talk about personal and then move to cyber, and then we'll end up with some personal notes. Perfect Citizen, new initiative announced by the National Security Agency to increase situational awareness of cyber assaults on industry and government systems. What are the pros and cons of such a program? And what can the NSA do to build trust with our citizens that will ensure confidence that this program is managed properly?
Okay. You all familiar with what Robert just brought up, Perfect Citizen? Rich, you're familiar, right? Yeah. This is an NSA program that was the subject of a Wall Street Journal report by Siobhan Gorman. It was an NSA, by the way, I'm out of government, so I know what I read in the papers. It was an NSA program, it was a contract to, I believe, Raytheon to develop tech, okay, Raytheon crowd back there, okay, good. Okay, to develop technology that would help defend critical infrastructure against cyber attack. Okay, that sounds like right smack dab in the middle of the lane that you would want NSA to be playing in, because it does have a cyber defense function. And Siobhan, she's Siobhan Gorman from the Journal, who used to be the Baltimore Sun reporter, so she's quite familiar with things NSA. Siobhan writes this up like it's coming after your and my personal freedom probably by Tuesday morning. And I don't know the details, all right? And I'm not even going to try to find out. But that was just another illustration for me of one of the problems we have, and I know we'll get into it in the panel later, Robert, is how do we do the kinds of things we have to do? And let's talk about internet security, okay? Which, if we are to be successful, have to be very powerful and, frankly, from time to time, somewhat secretive, inside a political culture that distrusts probably only two things: power and secrecy. And my experience at the national level, and I've got to be careful not to start whining here, because I've had very powerful and positive dialogue with a lot of reporters, all right? But the general instinct of reporting on government activity, intelligence activity, and especially cyber activity, is for the reporter to take the story by the hand and walk it as fast as he or she can into the darkest corner of the room. So that rather than informing the public dialogue about dangers and responses to dangers and so on, it misshapes the public dialogue. And I don't know what to do about that other than make little sermonettes like I just did. The folks in this room have a lot, and the folks back there who actually know some of the details, have a lot more they can say about this to set the record straight, although there are limits. You know, the last thing you want to do is, let me tell you how good this is and how it works, so I don't have bad newspaper stories written about me, is probably not the best of all possible worlds by putting the technology out there. So again, it's an area that the broader political culture makes things harder than they really should be.
During our preparation a couple weeks ago, I'm looking at my notes, when this topic came up, you mentioned like an analogy to the Terrorist Advantage Program.
Terrorist Advantage Program?
Right, that was under your watch.
Yeah.
And are there some similarities with that messaging with the press and what's starting to become here possibly?
Yeah, we're kind of going into the portion of the program that's going to be press bashing, so just hang on, we'll do that for a few minutes here. And with what's going on with WikiLeaks, why not, right? Again, what Robert's referring to is the NSA program that monitored al-Qaeda communications into and out of the United States under President Bush's authorization as Commander-in-Chief shortly after the September 11th attacks. I did it. I'm glad I did it. And the people at NSA who did it really, really well. Surprisingly, with an incredible respect for American privacy. Now, the story gets written up as if the folks at NSA are reading everyone in this room's email on a daily basis. It simply wasn't true. It's a long story. It takes too much time to go into it. And frankly, I can only get to a certain level and then I got to stop because of classification. But to relate, in the room in which we did the terrorist surveillance program, all right, that's comms in and out of the U.S., which we have reason to believe are one or both ends are affiliated with Al-Qaeda, all right? I've been in the room. You go in there and you work. It's small. I mean, it's not the massive program that people pretended it was. And in the center of the room, there's a sign hanging down. And the sign simply says, what constitutes a U.S. person? Now, anybody here with NSA background knows I'm referring to something called UCIT 18, which is the procedures we use to protect anybody out there who's protected by the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So in this room, in which NSA was doing its most aggressive collection, in which it truly was touching, bumping against U.S. privacy in a way that it had not done before the presidential authorization, foremost in the minds of the NSA folks who were doing it were the standard protections of American privacy. Didn't show up in anybody's story. All right, the story out there, particularly from the press on both coasts, is still this terribly ominous program. So again, it doesn't inform a public dialogue. It tends to misshape it. That's the connection between the two programs.
Right. Thank you. Do you believe our nation is prepared for a large cyber attack on our critical infrastructures and our command and control systems? And if not, why?
Oh, sure, we're ready. No. No.
kind of led him down that path, right?
I'm a little less over the edge on this than Dick Clark is. Okay. Even Mike McConnell. Okay. Mike, and I'll mention this a little bit in the keynote tomorrow. Mike throws out, we had a wonderful op-ed in the Washington Post about 3 months ago. I mean, it was long, and they blocked out the middle of the op-ed page in the Sunday section. So it must have been about 1,500 words, and they don't like you to write much more than 850. So they gave Mike, former DNI, a lot of room to work. And he says we are at war, and we're being defeated, and the time to start defending ourselves was yesterday. All right. So I don't quite get to that kind of language. Okay. But we are under attack, and I'm going to spend some time tomorrow trying to make a distinction between espionage and war, but we'll save that for tomorrow. Mike McConnell and I were in Manhattan around the end of April. And it was the former DNI, former DCIA, and George Tenet was there too, another former DCI. And we were in the room with, the only adequate description I can give you is a bunch of Wall Street types, okay? So you get the sense of the audience. And the purpose of it was to discuss cyber. And so we're getting asked a few questions, and Mike's saying what he's saying, and I'm saying what I'm saying. And we're talking a lot about things that are very familiar to the folks in this room, so I won't go into them very much. And we could tell that these folks were pretty much following along. All right? Yeah, okay, we get your point here, we get your point here, we get your point here. And then, about midway through the main course, one of the folks in attendance asked the absolute core question that now, in retrospect, was on everybody's mind in that room. Because I mean, we just spent, 45 minutes telling them the earth was about to end because of the danger of cyber assault. And one of the entrepreneurs kind of leaned forward, as I said, about midway through the meal, and looked at Mike and me and said, "How much do you think this is going to cost me?" And that was a tremendously revealing moment for us. Now, he wasn't talking about after the attack, what's going to be the bomb damage assessment. He was going to say, what he was saying was, how much of the money that I really don't want to spend on this am I really going to have to spend on this? And please don't tell me it's a big number. And until we get beyond that attitude, until we get beyond that mindset, that cyber defense is an added cost that subtracts from efficiency and profit. And until we get there, the answer to your question is no, we're not ready.
Thank you. Prior to the summer of 1941, America's foreign intelligence organizations were fragmented and isolated from each other. Hence the appointment of William Donovan as the first coordinator of information, which was in the following year or so designated as the Office of Strategic Services, and then in 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency. Subsequent congressional law established the D&I position as a designated leader of the U.S. intelligence communities. The result of these transformations have led to great strides in the coordination, assimilation, and sharing of information among different agencies. What lessons have we learned from dissolving these walls towards more effective information sharing practices in the world of cyber, especially in the recent Washington Post article that highlighted the large and segmented IC and questioning their productivity and the large expense to do so?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a longer answer than you counted on, but I'll be efficient. There are two major stories in the press in the last 10 days. One was this three-parter from Dana Priest and Bill Arkin on contractors and the size of the intelligence community. And then the last one is the WikiLeaks story and all that's running out there. There's actually connective tissue between those two stories, at least in my mind. Okay, so just bear with me, because frankly, you're involved in the kinds of folks represented in this room are involved in that connective tissue. First point on the Dana Priest story. That story took as a given that reliance on the private sector by the American intelligence community was at best, how to put it, it wasn't a good thing. All right. In any area in which we were relying on the public sector, we better have a really good reason as to why we're doing it, as opposed to government employees. In other words, if you're using a contractor to do something, you got to explain yourself. I mean, that's the fundamental tone of the article. I find that remarkable. Okay, Truth in Lending, as director of CIA, I cut our reliance on contractors 15%. All right. But I did that because we just spent a lot of money on contractors after 9/11, and I knew there were inefficiencies in the system, and I could cut it 15%, and I probably still had a lot of fat left before I started to get the muscle. So I did that. But to imagine that we have to explain ourselves to go to the broader elements of American society for expertise is really quite a puzzling proposition. I don't know why we have to be defensive about that. And so, I mean, one of the themes I know of this gathering is how can we work in more shared responsibilities, more common efforts against common national problems. I mean, it's the root of half the questions you've asked me this afternoon. And yet we now have reinserted on us this, in my mind, artificial divide between private sector and public sector for a lot of things. And I think it really, really creates serious wounds when it comes to things cyber. Because so much of American expertise is in the private sector. I'm looking at friends here from NSA. And I remember thinking when I was director of NSA, okay, the National Security Agency created American computing. Okay? And it bled out from NSA to the rest of American society. I mean, that is no longer true. Right? There's no way anything run by any government can do the kinds of things that are required to do to survive in the information space, the information technology space that's out there today. Okay? So you want me on government procurement contracts to keep up with Osama bin Laden's gang, who goes down to whatever the local Radio Shack is called and gets the next generation technology every 6 months. And I can't. That's impossible. And so the first thing that was offensive about the series in the Post was that it just took the assumption that if you're using contractors, using outsiders, if you weren't blue badgers, government employees, you had to